Hi, everyone, and welcome to Product Confidential. Today's chat is going to see Eva and I talk to our guest, Alex Rechevskiy. Alex has worked as a group product manager at Google, run big product teams for mid-sized companies, and has done product consulting and development for startups, including his own. Since 2020, Alex has also coached and mentored hundreds of PMs at all stages of their careers and helped many clients land product roles at top tech companies. So in today's product confidential episode, we're going to be covering a few topics, including asking Alex for tips that would be useful for anybody out there who's hoping to accelerate their product careers in 2024, and also asking what it was like getting into Google, what their hiring process was like, and what it was like building a career there. So firstly, Alex, great to have you and welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. We're really excited for this chat. So if anyone cares to follow you on LinkedIn or on YouTube, we'll be putting the links in the show notes, but they'll see that you create a ton of great online content for folks looking to build or bolster a career in product. And with it being earlier in the year, we imagine that many of our listeners will probably have made New Year's resolutions to try and land a dream role in one of the big tech giants' product functions. So with that in mind, what characteristics, behaviors, or traits do the big tech companies look for when hiring PMs?
Sure, that's a great question. I think first thing that I would encourage anyone that wants to work at these tech companies is first of all have a long-term view. So have a little bit of a marathon approach. It sometimes takes multiple attempts to actually make it in, and you kind of have to be structured about it. So they usually allow you to come in every 6 months to re-interview, and don't be shy about using that. So I definitely don't encourage people to say like, I'm getting in, that's it. Like have it be more of a destination where you're heading, because it can be difficult if you've never worked in these companies before, or you've never done these type of interviews before. In terms of, Michael, your question of what they actually look for, there's a pretty rigorous product management interview process at all of these companies. And in fact, it's trickled down to other companies, like mid-sized companies as well, and even startups like start to adopt some of this methodology. And folks have probably seen, lots on the internet about this process, but effectively it's got a few components. The first component is, they look for folks that have built things. So obviously experience actually doing product management in tech, building products, building apps, building, websites that solve problems for users and, ideally generate some sort of profit. So they look for this entrepreneurial streaks and background. They certainly look for these product design chops for analytical aspects where someone can break down a problem, figure out paths to solution, sort of structure a path there, and reason their way to a solution, as opposed to someone that like just knows the solution. And there's a few other aspects in there, like you have to be well-rounded in terms of like understanding the business landscape, uh, strategy and vision, and working with teams, like cross-functional collaboration, which is a dreaded word for people that have done it. It can be like elicit some PTSD from folks that have worked in tech for a while. But cross-functional collaboration is super important because you're trying to get things done like at these ridiculous scales of like dozens, hundreds, and sometimes thousands of people from all distinct roles and functions, are trying to build something together that is kind of makes sense, cohesively within what the company is trying to accomplish. So, and the product management interview is structured around these things. Like there'll be a product design element, there'll be a business and strategy element, there will be analytical and execution in terms of like getting things done and making decisions. There will be behavioral components where we talk about your experiences with getting things done with big teams and leading teams. And so all of those things are actually quite rigorously tested for. And that doesn't mean there's no false positives. There certainly are. There's variability. Like when you go in for an interview, you don't know who you're going to get. You're going to get like 5 to 7 different people throughout the process. And you can do your best to prepare, but at the end of the day, you can't prepare for everything. And so, that's why I'm saying like having this approach of going in multiple times if need be at multiple companies is a better path. So those are kind of some of the things. We can kind of dive deeper into any of them if you'd like. That's a high level view.
Yeah, that's a really helpful overview, and there's some things I'd like to dive into there. But before I get into asking some more questions, what you said about the joys and the horrors of multidisciplinary teams, myself and Evie were chatting about that not too long ago, because one of the great things about product management is working with different people. One of the worst things about product management is working with different people, because a lot of the time it can feel, you can have the best processes in place, you can be like doing all the right things, but a lot of the time your job as the PM is to be a bit of an empath and give the
Mhm.
team what they need. And that's really dependent on the people that you have on your team. And sometimes, in my experience, you've got to kind of like wear the hat of like a psychologist in some respects, and figure out like what each individual or what the team needs in a collective. Is that something that
Yeah.
you've experienced?
Yeah, for sure. Like you're in meetings all the time. You're basically communicating all the time. Like I don't, you're supposed to put away some focus time and sneak some actual work time in there. But primarily, especially as you get into higher levels, as an example, like directors, for instance, I think they have all 40 hours of meetings actually on their calendar. So the higher you go, the more these meetings you attend, and it's just an always a battle with it. So by definition, you're just always talking. You're always communicating, obviously written and verbal. And yeah, you will certainly get a lot more done if you understand the specifics for each person and team. And that can get actually like that's probably the exhausting part is I think on the personal level, once you spend some time with people and you're an experienced communicator, you can kind of get there, understand where they're coming from. But then there's the organizational component where you have to understand what each team is trying to accomplish within the context of what everybody else is doing. And that's you can call it politics or like the corporate reality of it. It is politics, but at the same time, like you are working with a lot of different teams. There's no way around it. And that's the stuff that really gets exhausting, at least for me personally and for other folks that I've worked with, trying to understand like where everybody's coming from, what they need. Sometimes they don't know what they need. Often they don't know what they need. So that can get exhausting for sure. And then in terms of like being a psychologist or a therapist, that's always the case because you're always trying to encourage and inspire your people to work. Like, hey, let's like look how exciting this thing is. Wouldn't it be awesome if we just hit this goal? And one of the things, like I said, I want to kind of dispel the myth that the Bay Area knows what they're doing because um, I really want people to have the right expectations when they're going into these companies because sometimes people just assume that they have it all figured out, and that's not the case at all. And it will be exhausting, it will be confusing, it will be nebulous, and so that's like lately, that's been my main thesis is that I want to make sure that people understand what awaits them at these big tech companies because people, they create these dreams for themselves. Like these companies are the best. I'm gonna be on top of the world. It's gonna be amazing. And then it's really not. So like there's nuance to that, but there's so much content out there if you look on the internet about how amazing it is that I just want to pour some cold water on that.
Well, oh, Evie, go on.
I mean, is this from a perspective of it's got the same nuances as every tech company anywhere, like you, and even bigger nuances because they're such big companies? Or is it that people have these massive expectations that this is going to be the place that's absolutely magical and actually like they're disappointed when they get there?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. It's the latter. So you and they can't help it. Like they've built up these reputations, especially some of these companies, like the darlings of the tech world. I worked at Google, very fortunate to work there, but I myself was coming in with like just ridiculous expectations, which weren't even like I don't even know what they were rooted in. It's just this general reputation. And they don't really try to discourage that thinking because obviously that's what keeps them, you know, people wanting to get in there. It's like, Harvard University or like some big educational institutions. Um, is just extremely selective, extremely hard to get into, and they don't do anything to dispel the myth that, like, at the end of the day, it's also just a company, and they're working. It's pretty hard work over there, and also the work doesn't make sense almost all the time, and not just the product management function. And like the jokes about being inside versus being outside begin from like month 2, maybe. Then you start to share the internal memes of like what people think this is, what it is in reality. Like one story that really rings a bell for me is maybe a couple quarters into the work, when we were dealing with some really thorny issues and not able to make forward progress. And there was this meme where it's like, what people think it's like to work at this tech company, it's a cruise ship. It's just sailing away. And then what it's actually like, and it's like 6 people on a lifeboat just trying to, paddle away. And so someone sent it to me on my team, and it's like everybody like that. It was just, it's spot on. So because the difference is so stark. So it's not that, it's not that there's something inherently disappointing about it. It's just, for me, it's just the expectations. It's the big thing. And so I want to be clear, some of the folks that I work with and folks that I coach, first, I want to make sure that they understand the reasons for wanting to work at these companies. You should have your reasons very clear. A lot of times it's like, I want to have, broad impact and reach billions of users. And yet technically you will, but also like at what cost? What will you actually be working on? Again, we can get into it, but you're not going to be like making drastic changes in these $100 billion properties. If you think about it, like if you look at the tech landscape, what really innovative, like big changing products have you seen lately? Like in the last 10, 20 years, probably there's been some, but in terms of like, once it's there, it doesn't really move by like leaps and bounds. There's no night and day stuff to it. Case in point is like ChatGPT came out. Google was sitting on this technology for 4 years. They're the ones who kind of pioneered the transformer. They didn't do anything with it. So you're going to see things like that basically throughout. And happy to explore that or not explore that. It's really up to you.
I think what I'd be keen to explore is, now that we've shattered the hopes of anyone who's listened to this episode thinking, wow, this is amazing, I want to work there. We might return, if there's anyone who really is a sucker for punishment, maybe at the end we'll start talking about some tips on how to game the hiring process. But what I would be interested in, something you mentioned before about what you try to do with people is to check their motivations and see if they have the right motivations. What then, in your opinion, are the right motivations for wanting to work at one of the tech giants?
There definitely is some learning to be done. So I think it is beneficial for, if you haven't worked at a gigantic company with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, I think it behooves you to do that if you want to become a better product professional and just face the realities of what's out there. So the scale of it is a thing. However, there's only a limited amount of learning, because it's sort of becomes this different way of working. So very slow, methodical. It depends on the company itself, but in wherever you're working, you're not going to be making gigantic strides in these big properties. So getting experience working with big technologies and broad user bases and huge revenue numbers, I think it's valuable. That's a good reason. Second reason, realistically, is long-term career trajectory. Once you're in a big tech company, it's much easier to get into other big tech companies just by virtue of getting through the gatekeepers a little bit easier. It's just like having a good university will open up a few doors, fewer now than in the past. Nowadays, if you want to be in tech and you work for the bigger the company that you work for, the easier it is for you to get invitations to interview. It doesn't mean you're going to get the job, but it gives you an invitation to interview that's easier to get. So the second reason is access to the top tech companies, the top startups, theoretically. Although some startups will actively not work with people that have a lot of big tech experience because they are afraid that, and with some, with some logic to this, that those people forgot how to actually like ship or launch anything. Which is totally reasonable because it takes, years to ship anything in big companies. You add the corporate realities, and then you add this gigantic user bases and ton of revenue in the line, and it becomes almost impossible to ship anything. So it literally takes years. Then the next good reason is compensation. If you want to build a career as a product professional and you also want to make more money, if that's important for you, then it's going to be hard to compete with the compensation. Of course, with startups, like often there's an interest in folks getting into a startup and then waiting for some sort of acquisition or exit, in which case they can get some sort of shares in the company, which will be worth something. Usually, though, working for the big tech company is going to give you a bigger payoff because those stocks are public. You can trade them immediately. Usually they trade very high valuation. And because of the scale of the products involved, like the complexity, it's not really getting any easier. And so the demand will, at least in the near future, continue to be there. So for the top roles, you can get into millions and millions of dollars of annual compensation in, the top tech, mainly American companies. But again, it kind of permeates throughout the world, where you'll see big companies in Europe and Asia reach similar levels of compensation. And of course, it doesn't scale linearly. So at first it's more flat, but then later it does start to pick up as you get into more management roles. So you can get really, really substantial compensation. And so a little bit of a mercenary view, but I think it's really appropriate here. And it is a fine motivation for getting into these companies. And then, of course, you do get access to people that like to theoretically get things done and have, big aspirations and are more motivated, I think. Certainly there's a huge luck component to actually getting in, but at the same time, all things being equal, you're probably going to get a more hardworking person, if you were to take at random, just because it takes a lot of preparation work to actually get in. And then it also takes a lot of work to actually be there. And so there's just this self-selection criteria going on, and you can meet a lot of interesting folks. And that's why people end up like finding co-founders and going the startup routes. But that's also, I mean, it's useful, but I wouldn't say that's a good like top reason. But those are some of the reasons that I would say are good reasons. And notice none of them are to like have a huge impact on the world or something like that, right? Or
Yeah.
like to eat the delicious cafeteria food, which is delicious. You do gain like 10 pounds in the first year.
Yeah, Booking.com also offer free lunch now. I'm like, what an extra perk. I think they still do, like I might be wrong. But I was at Booking.com for 4 years, and it was like, again, there's a lot of those reasons really resonate. I feel like compared to places maybe like Google or Meta, like we were able to have more impact. We were still moving a lot of things, trying some new stuff, getting some new products out there. But the
We
biggest
saw
benefit,
that. You were like in
yeah,
the business unit that I was in. Booking was like my number one spender, number one client.
yeah, we're doing stuff. Well, this was like 3 years ago. But it was like one of the biggest benefits, I think, as a younger PM was that you could go in and like really learn those product principles and learn how to do product really well. But like you say, that doesn't always then mean that you can deliver the impact. But would you say that there is still some of that kind of benefit from those companies, that you can really explore things like strategy and using OKRs effectively, or any of those kind of topics?
Yes, that is there. So that is that sort of that first benefit of like working at a big company. But I think maybe, well, I don't know, the mid-sized tech companies, like something like Booking, in fact, might be arguably more effective at teaching you like the fundamental product stuff. Over at the big tech companies, like the biggest ones, they definitely like there's from the product perspective, it's very much self-driven. There's not really any, there's not even really any best practices anywhere. Like you really have to actively seek them out. You have to self-educate. You have to educate your group. You have to build your group. It's all done completely internally. Of course, that is more Google and Facebook or Meta. That's kind of the culture. But wherever you will be, you're going to be responsible for your own education. And certainly at working in these big tech companies, you're going to face the challenges of like navigating, like you said, OKRs and big teams. And so you'll need to figure out how to actually do that effectively. And you're right, like there's nowhere else that you can get those challenges specifically. So, but the tools themselves, I found that at least internally, you have to kind of look around to find them. You have to find the right mentors. That's really there's kind of a lack of support structures, and I think that's the case not just at these top tech companies, but in general. Like you have to build these communities. You have to create these mentor structures for people that are on your team, especially the folks that are early career. And that's kind of why I built the product career accelerator, is because I realized that basically everywhere I've worked on, I've had to figure everything out by myself. And that's the case for a lot of folks. And it doesn't really need to be like that. So I probably spent like years doing stuff that didn't make any sense and missed out on hundreds of thousands of dollars just because I didn't really have a mentor, a program, a support system. And if you are lucky enough to have a good manager, I think that can go a long way, but you still can't talk about everything with your manager that's relating to your work. You kind of need someone that is in your corner and you can share everything with relating to your career. And then that makes things much easier. I don't know. Has that been your experience? Like how have you been also taught yourself all these things?
Yeah, like I mean, and this is part of the reason why we're doing this podcast as well, is to bring these things to life. And it's like I love all of the things that you've just been saying that really dispel those myths, because people think that you'll just go in and learn all of this stuff, and it's like you have some great people around you that you can learn from, but you have to be proactive to go out and seek that information and get that guidance and work out how to tweak and change those strategies in a way that will really work for you.
Yeah.
And like you say, I think a lot of people are so disillusioned to that. They think that things will just work themselves out, and then you feel a bit frustrated that you're not having the impact that you want, because you
Yeah.
need to focus more on things like people management skills or working out strategically how to progress your own career. So it's
Yeah.
nice that you're starting to shape that kind of conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
I think as well. So I work for the BBC, and it's a really wonderful organization to work for. But it has some of the challenges that you've outlined of being a big tech employer. That it's huge, it's sprawling, it's a big organization, and people try their best when you join to give you like, here's a welcome pack, here's the key information that you need to know. But how can you distill all of that information down into a slide deck that someone can digest? It's just not possible. So I think there's a big thing about what you mentioned about being a self-starter. And one of the key things I found at the BBC is to make good relationships and figure out who are the people that can show me around and give me knowledge. And that, I suppose, is something that if you have like a good mentor or manager in the organization, they can guide you. But equally, it's I think a lot of it is working on your own initiative and figuring out that no one's going to give me the keys to understand all of this. I've got to become a bit of a detective and figure this out for myself, or at least learn how to.
Yeah, and also I think people have, at least I've noticed this in myself and the folks that I've worked with, they don't take too long view of a perspective on their career. Like it's like, what's the next thing? I'm working day to day, like very relatively short-sighted. And I'm probably the most guilty of this, but you do have to zoom out and try to figure out like, well, where are you headed in general? Like, can you try to orient your work life to somewhere where you can work on things that are a little bit more interesting for you? Can you orient it to somewhere where you can have like areas of potential development for you, so you're forced to actually improve those aspects? Because if you go on autopilot, like you just going where the river takes you, which is most folks, you're kind of dealing with challenges. They come up, you're going to be frustrated. You're always like kind of stuck in your, your short-sighted view, and it can be frustrating. Like product work, it should be fun. It could be fun. Like the challenges could be interesting. So you have to zoom out a little bit, give yourself a break. I think with the big tech companies, especially, it's like, what are our goals next quarter? It's like January, here we go. We got to nail, like hit these goals. February, your mid-quarter check-in. What have you done? 4 weeks. I bet you've gotten a lot done in this gigantic corporation in 4 weeks, huh? Did you get a couple of meetings done? A couple of conversations? Did you like what? Do it like a pre-review deck and then maybe a review deck? Okay, great. Time to set next quarter's goals. Okay, what? Wow. Oh, we didn't move any metrics. Oh my God, let's get together and brainstorm why these metrics didn't move. Okay, let's get the update to leadership. And it's just nonsense. And it's crazy. You're stuck in this crazy loop. So it can be hard to break out of it. I suggest like start with yourself and just like relax and have a plan. Don't take on too much work. Ignore people that are like, oh, we got this new thing. There's this escalation. The VP wants to know why these numbers aren't moving. We got to get an email together, then a meeting on it, then a pre-meeting, then a post-meeting. Just relax, like understand your goals. Have like one goal. Can you have one goal? Don't have 18 goals. You have one goal, and then just tell your manager, I'm just going to be doing this thing for a while. So, and then try to encourage and like build that around you. It can be difficult, but at least you kind of start a way to break out of this crazy grind, because burnout is a real thing. People just, like my team members are like, hey, Alex, I was checking out a document, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I noticed some problems in it. Why are you doing that? Don't do that. Don't. So, like you have to start building this like piece by piece, and slow down, have a long-term view. And that's another thing that we're trying to do again in this like community is, even though it's called the Career Accelerator, we do want to speed your career up, but we want to do it in a sustainable way. We want to do it in a long-term perspective. Take a 5-year perspective, take a 10-year perspective. You don't want to do these, find out a couple of years down the line that you're burnt out, you're doing stuff that you hate. Yeah, unfortunately, I have people writing me that they're like I had to, I'm just like crying during meetings or like in the evening. It gets really crazy and intense. And all right, I've gotten off on a rant talking about like the bad side
I don't
of
know
it.
if you saw though, Alex,
Get
but I was like
practical.
smiling.
Stop me.
But I'm like, I couldn't agree more. It's like all of these things from like so many different rants, but like quarterly planning cycles. Like, okay, like let's spend 1 month trying to get our goals started, and then we get part way, and then let's try and spend a month trying to work out what our next goals are. Like, no, like have a vision and a strategy, and like know what impact you want to deliver longer term, and then be able to break that down. But that doesn't mean you need to change focus every quarter. Like you can just keep going and get some momentum and actually deliver some impact. So yes, but then also there's so much on that conversation about how to structure your own career. And I think that Michael and I have spoken about this before and on this podcast about the fact that you try and wear this busyness as like a badge of honor. Like, this is how dedicated I am to my job that I reviewed this document at 2 a.m. But if you take that time for yourself, and I mean, like January is a great time to do this, take time to take a step back and go through and say, well, what are my actual goals? Like, what do I want to deliver this year? And who am I doing this for? And like, what's actually going to help me get there? And like you say, that's probably just one thing. So scrap everything else, try and ignore everything else, try and cut out other meetings that you don't need, and just be dedicated on that thing that's really going to make a difference to you. And like, you can then excel your career in a way that you want.
Yeah, and it's like breaking out of the vicious cycle and into a virtuous cycle can be so difficult because it requires that first win from the focused, dedicated strategy, which can be so hard. But I think I agree. Like January is a good time because it's going to start. It's going to happen. I know what it's like to come out of the post-holiday like slight relaxation, if you were even able to get that. And then slowly they suck you back into the quarterly planning cycles and the refreshing of the metric. And so, yeah, try to have a focus, really protect your goals. Don't take on the work just to, I think this happens with early career professionals, is like they're happy when people are giving them more work because it makes it like, oh, great, I'm going above and beyond. And that can be true. But at the same time, you have to be kind of go into it with both eyes open and understand that that's where that road leads. It's going to lead you to like potential burnout and losing sight of the things that matter for yourself. And yes, I have plenty of clients and colleagues that are getting promotions but are like unhappy, very unhappy with their work.
I think,
And
oh, sorry,
yeah,
Alex.
I was just gonna say like, and that's why sometimes like if you have your compensation as a goal, then hey, you know what, I'm suffering for the money. I don't recommend to do this, but at least you can say, okay, well, I'm just going to suffer this many years. And by the way, that used to be something that I like quasi recommended as a way to push through, but I don't think I don't really agree with that because we only have one life and you have to figure out a way. Like, we don't need all that. A happy life, a fulfilling life. It can be challenging, but fulfilling one nonetheless, I think is just unequivocally better. Sorry, Michael.
No, no, not at all. Just reflecting on what you said, I'm pleased that I think I've managed to avoid the pitfalls of being too busy, but in a way that I've managed to still deliver impact where I've been. And I put that down to having really good mentorship in the companies I've been in and having people when I have been eager to do too much, just to be like, whoa, Neddy, calm down. This is a bit crazy. You don't have to do all these
Right.
things, like delegate this. And I think that taught me good habits early on, because otherwise I probably would have had the personality type to be chomping at the bit. And now,
Mhm.
like, I hear people, especially on this podcast, talk about burnout and imposter syndrome, and I think, some people really protected me from that, and they've taught me how to be a better, more productive PM by actually being valuable with my time. So I really agree with what you've suggested there. One thing that I would like us to end the podcast talking about, I think you did a really good job of opening people's eyes to the reality of working at a big tech company, but then also going on to say there are some really good benefits, though. If you go in with your eyes open, these are the things that are on offer. So if someone is listening in January and thinking, right, I want to progress my career or have a 5-year, 10-year plan, and maybe working in a big tech company is part of that plan, what tips would you give to anyone who wants to go on that journey?
Yeah, that's a great question, Len. For sure, a good spot to finish because I have been bashing this so much, but I definitely gave good reasons to go in there. And quite honestly, I still think that if you want to have a long-term product career, you should. You sort of have to. You have to get through that, and hopefully it'll be a good experience. But yeah, I recommend it to everybody. It is hard to get in. Don't simultaneously, it's kind of like starting a startup a little bit because you have to understand the odds. They're very low, but at the same time, ignore the odds and assume that you're going to make it. So you understand the odds, and most people don't make it. It's got super low actual acceptance rates. However, out of the people that have the necessary experience and then put in the necessary training to understand the principles of the way that these interviews work now, because there is a certain way that they work. If you don't understand the way that these interviews work, you have 0% chance of getting in. Absolutely. Like, there's too many things that will take you out. Once you understand the way that the interviews work, and there is a general principle to the thing, and then there's also company specific aspects to it. So Meta will be slightly different from Google, will be totally different from Amazon, will be way different from Tesla, and so on and so forth. So you have to understand the general principles, learn the general principles, understand the company specific principles, and then you have to put in the crazy amount of time for prep. There's no way to get into these companies without prep. Where I said you have 0% chance if you don't understand the principles. You have 5% chance if you don't put in the practice. So you just can't be done. If you do practice, you have to get to a place where you don't memorize things, you internalize them. And that means that you understand the frameworks, but you also understand the practical experience of running product teams and shipping things and building things and going from 0 to 1. So you're picking up the experience, and then you learn every aspect of these, and then you practice with different people, practice with folks like myself, like a product management coach or an interview coach, practice with your buddies who are maybe also trying to get on the same track, or with other folks that are trying to get into a bigger tech company. And you're practicing for things like understanding structure, understanding time management, understanding how to demonstrate the signals that they need to see for each type of interview. Product design, there's a set of certain flags that they're looking for: business and strategy, execution, analytical, leadership, behavioral questions. There's a whole suite of them to understand. Break it down and give yourself time. This is why I say like 3 to 6 months is the prep time. Anytime you're trying to get into a big tech company, if you really want to give yourself a solid shot where you can say, you know what, I have 30% odds, I have 40, 50, 60% odds. The job of the product career accelerator that I've just started, we just kicked it off yesterday, is to just bump up your odds. And what we do is we cover what you need to know, what you need to learn, and then what you need to practice. So we run these interview practice, group sessions, individual sessions, where we zoom in on certain aspects of it, like how do you structure the question or the answer, how do you progress, how do you make sure that you don't lose the time, and how do you ultimately show the interviewer what you need to show in order to get a good recommendation. So 3 to 6 months, understanding, give yourself time to practice. It should be a daily regimen. I recommend like an hour a day over a period of 3 to 6 months, because you need to get into the companies. You need to actually have a resume that will be reviewed. You need to either a referral or just a cold application, but it needs to be presented in a certain way. You need to speak with the recruiter. Then you need to start the process of the interviews. You need to manage your time so that you're applying to multiple top companies, and that even if you strike out, you can come back again in 6 months. So 3 to 6 months is sort of like the minimum prep time for going into this. Sometimes I'll have people contacting me. They're like, I've got an interview next week and I haven't prepared at all. And then I say, well, try to push it out a month, because you're not going to get anything done in a week, realistically. So, definitely check out the Product Career Accelerator. We're going to be picking up folks for hopefully February or March, the next cohort, to try to get started. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing. It's going to be primarily dedicated to landing your next product role, with a specific emphasis on folks that want to get into the fangs or the mangs of today.
And like, I know you mentioned a load of useful things in there, and like there's some obviously like mid-sized tech companies that on a very high level might sound like they interview in a similar kind of way. Like you need to go in and be able to answer questions about different topics in these different areas. What would you say is so much like harder about the big tech companies? Is it like in terms of the standard of answers that you need to be able to give?
Actually, it's not. It's just that it's a little bit more structured. So you cover all the bases. So when you go into companies, the mid-sized tech companies, they might be like more emphasis on the behavioral part of things, or bigger emphasis on just the product design. And the bigger companies, you just have all those bases covered. And so I did probably 150 interviews inside Google, interviewing other folks, and I saw the bell curve of recommendations that I made, and you can actually see everybody's like guidance and recommendations after the interviews. And mine was a bell curve that's centered around do not hire. So you get some hire, very few strong hire, and like the majority of people do not hire, leaning do not hire, and so on. And they give interviewers a very specific set of guidance, like for product design, here are the things that we're looking for. Business and strategy, here are the things that we're looking for. So the interviewer has to justify. It's not like, oh, how did I feel? I felt like it was great. We had a great connection. So they're trying to move people away from all of our kind of intrinsic biases. Obviously, because if there's someone like you have a really good rapport with, does that mean that they would be a more successful product manager? Maybe to a degree, because you have rapport, but also not necessarily with other folks. So that's why it's like a little bit of a false signal. But nonetheless, you can give it some weight. So there's very specific or rigorous structure, whereas in other companies, you might not have that. You might not have that in quantity, and you might not have that in quality in terms of the process, where first an interviewer will give the feedback, then a committee will review all the feedback, and then they'll make a separate decision based on all of the recommendations. But you're getting there. Like, we're talking with some mid-sized companies that are having a similar type of process. Sometimes it can be also different where it's only behavioral, and others it can be only product and strategy. So you have to, and nowadays you can find out. And I recommend that you just ask the recruiter straight up, what is your hiring process? What are you looking for? What are you looking for in this stage, in this call? Super important. People don't do it. They just go in blind and then they kind of crash and burn.
That's really useful and really practical, actionable advice that people can use there, Alex. I think that's a really good place to wrap it up. So thanks a lot for your time. I'm sure there's loads of information in there for people who are interested in improving their career this year. So thanks a lot for that. And everything that you've talked about on the show we'll include in the show notes as well.
Thank you very much. Like I said, go in with the right expectations, practice hard, you can do it. And best of luck to you. Thanks very much, guys.
Alex. Thank you.
All right, of course.
I can't find. Oh, I'm like